The first time I heard the Vampire King speak, he wasn't addressing a council or issuing a decree. He was standing in the gallery of glass, where the palace kept its tall mirrors like patient witnesses, and he sounded almost tired. I had been sent in early to polish fingerprints from the lower panes. My hands were small enough to reach the corners, the head housekeeper had said, and I was trying to do it quietly, because quiet was the first rule of staying human in a vampire palace. A woman's voice drifted through the white curtains that divided the gallery from the inner hall. Light and amused, like someone testing the edge of a knife without intending to cut. "Do you like what you see?" For a moment, I thought she meant me. I felt my face heat as if I'd been caught standing where I didn't belong. Then the curtain shifted, just enough for me to glimpse the dark outline of a crown reflected in a mirror that hadn't been there a breath before. The Vampire King didn't look at the mirror. He looked at something beyond it, as if the glass showed him less than his own memory did. "I'm doing my best to keep my composure," he answered. The woman laughed softly, not cruelly. The curtain fell back into place. Their footsteps receded as though they had never happened at all. I stood with my rag in my hand, staring at my own blurred reflection in the mirror's edge. My hair was tied too tight, my collar too high, my eyes too wide. I had been in the palace 3 weeks, and I still flinched at every sudden silence. That morning's small difficulty was the same as most mornings, my fingers wouldn't stop trembling. It wasn't only fear. It was hunger, too, not the grand kind sung about in ballads, not the hunger of monsters, but the plain hunger of a girl whose meals now came at odd hours because the palace lived by moonlight. I had learned to eat when food appeared, even if I wasn't sure what time it was. I had learned that the kitchen smelled richest when the sky was darkest. I had learned that the sun, here, was something kept behind curtains and crystal panes like an artifact from a gentler age. And I had learned to keep my composure, too. When I first arrived at Veylin Court, I had expected chains. That was the village rumor, that the Vampire King collected humans the way misers collected coins. Instead, I was given a room with a narrow bed and a window that looked onto an inner courtyard where pale ivy climbed stone. I was given a grey uniform and a list of rules written in careful ink. Do not run in the halls. Do not bleed where you can be seen. Do not offer what you cannot bear to give. If you are afraid, breathe slowly and speak plainly. The last rule had been added in a different hand, as if someone had thought of it later and wanted it to matter. The head housekeeper, Illyra, read the list aloud to me on my first night. She was a vampire. There was no mistaking the stillness of her, the neatness of her movements, but she wore her authority like a shawl rather than armor. "You will be safe here if you are steady," she said. Steady is not the same as unfeeling. It means you do not let fear decide your next step. I had nodded like a good servant, because nodding was easier than telling the truth, that I didn't know if steadiness was something a person could learn, or only something they were born with. My work was ordinary. That, more than anything, was what confused me. I dusted book spines in the day library, where the windows were veiled with gauze that softened the light into something the vampires could tolerate. I carried trays of tea, mostly for the human staff, though the vampires liked the smell, and I copied labels for the archive shelves because my handwriting was neat and my spelling had been drilled into me by a schoolmaster who believed in Inca's salvation. I wasn't special. I wasn't chosen for prophecy or beauty. I had come because my father's cough had turned his lungs to paper, and the apothecary's fees had eaten our savings down to bone. The palace offered wages that could keep a family alive through winter. So I came, and I promised myself I would not be the kind of desperate that loses its own name. Some nights, I succeeded. Other nights, I lay awake listening to the palace breathe, pipes ticking, distant doors sighing shut, the faint hush of footsteps that didn't drag the way human feet did, and I wondered if dignity was something you could keep in your hands, like a bowl, or if it leaked out of you without your noticing. The first person who treated me like I wasn't made of glass was Thomas in the kitchens. He was older, with a crooked thumb and a habit of humming under his breath as he chopped herbs. "You're polishing mirrors now?" he asked one morning when I came to collect a tray. "Careful. Mirrors make people think too hard. They make vampires think too hard," I asked before I could stop myself. He paused, knife hovering. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. "They make everyone think too hard," he said. "That's why we keep them clean. Can't have royalty staring at smudges and deciding the whole world is flawed." It was a simple joke. It didn't change the facts of where we lived. But it did something else. It made the palace feel, for a moment, like a place where someone could laugh without it being a mistake. After that, I began to notice the small kindnesses that were easy to miss if you only watched for danger. Illyra always knocked before entering the human quarters, even though she didn't need permission. The gardeners, humans, mostly, left sprigs of lavender tied with twine on the window sills because the scent calmed the nerves. A young vampire page named Soren, all sharp elbows and serious eyes, began silently setting an extra cup of hot water near my desk in the archive room, as if he had decided hydration was a form of diplomacy. I tried not to romanticize them. Kindness didn't erase what they were. It didn't erase what we were, either, soft-bodied, quick-hearted, easily hurt. But kindness was real. And I found that if I acknowledged it, it didn't make me weaker. It made me more awake. The palace itself remained a mystery in the way a deep lake is a mystery, not threatening, exactly, but unknowable unless you were willing to sit still beside it for a long time. There were doors I was not allowed to open, corridors that seemed to change angle when I wasn't looking, and a particular set of stairs that led down into cool darkness where the air smelled faintly of iron and roses. The human staff avoided those stairs without talking about it. Avoiding without speaking was another rule, unwritten but understood. And yet the greatest mystery, to me, was not what the palace hid. It was why it kept us at all. One afternoon, my afternoon, which meant the sun was lowering and the palace was beginning to wake, Illyra found me in the day library with my hands paused over a stack of ledgers. My eyes ached from reading fine script, and I had been counting my wages in my head, planning how much I could send home. "You've settled," she said, and it was not a question. "I've learned where the stairs creak," I said, attempting lightness. Her mouth flickered, not quite a smile. "That's part of it." She hesitated, then folded her hands as if she were about to speak something delicate. "There is a rite tonight. You may be asked to assist." My throat tightened. "Assist how?" "You will stand in the outer hall," she said, carefully precise. "You will hold a lamp. That is all. You will not be touched." I tried to swallow. My mouth had gone dry. "If you do not wish to," she added, "you may refuse. No one here is permitted to compel you." Permitted. The word mattered, and it also didn't. A person could refuse and still suffer consequences that were never spoken aloud. "What is it for?" I asked. Illyra looked toward the veiled windows, as if measuring the light. "Composure," she said. Some of our kind believe it is strengthened by proximity. They test themselves. They remind themselves that restraint is a choice, not a story we tell to look civilized. The title of that thing, The King's Composure, echoed in my mind like a bell struck softly. I imagined standing in a hall while vampires walked past, hungry or not hungry, watching or not watching. I imagined my heart beating too fast and giving me away. I imagined my dignity slipping out of my fingers like water. And then I remembered my father, coughing into a cloth he tried to hide, and my mother's hands when she thought no one saw her counting coins. I remembered that I had come here not only to survive, but to keep my family from bending until they broke. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "If I can bring something with me." Illyria's brows rose slightly. "What?" "Lavender," I said. "And tea. For the humans who stand with me. We shouldn't do it with empty stomachs." For a moment, she simply regarded me. Then she inclined her head in a small, formal nod. "As you wish," she said. "That is sensible." That night, I stood in the outer hall with a lamp cradled in my hands. The lamp glass warmed my palms. Thomas had pressed a small packet of sweet bread into my pocket earlier without making a spectacle of it, and I could feel it there like a secret promise. Other humans stood at intervals along the wall. Some looked resigned, some frightened, some distant with the practiced numbness of those who have learned to leave their bodies behind. I recognized a laundress named Myra, her jaw set as if she were holding herself up from the inside. I caught her eye and offered half my sweet bread when the steward wasn't looking. Her shoulders loosened by a fraction. The vampires moved through the inner corridor beyond us, a quiet procession of dark silhouettes. No one rushed. No one lunged. There was no drama to satisfy a listener who wanted monsters. There was only the hush of discipline, the scent of candles, the steady thrum of my own blood in my ears. At one point, far down the corridor, I saw a crown's faint glint, only for a second, like a star behind cloud. The vampire king passed at a distance where I could not see his face clearly. He did not turn his head toward us. He did not pause. He moved as if he carried something heavy that no one else could help him hold. I found, to my surprise, that I could breathe. Not because I had become fearless. I was afraid the whole time. But I did not let the fear choose my posture. I did not let it steal my manners. I stood straight. I held the lamp steady. I offered Myra my bread. When the young vampire page saw and passed close enough that I could see his eyes, old, despite his youth, I met his gaze and gave a small nod, the way you might greet someone in a hallway at a school. He blinked, startled, then inclined his head back. Respect, not affection. That was all. It was enough. Afterward, when the hall emptied and the lamp wicks were pinched out, Illyria approached me. Her face looked even paler in the dim, but her voice was gentle. "You did well," she said. "I didn't do anything," I answered, because it was true. I had only stood there and kept my hands from shaking too much. "You kept yourself," she corrected. "That is not nothing." In the days that followed, something in me shifted, not dramatically, not like a spell snapping into place, but like a knot slowly loosening. I began to understand that courage in this palace was rarely loud. It was measured in ordinary choices, eating when food appeared instead of pretending you weren't hungry, asking for a bandage before a paper cut became a problem, Speaking plainly when silent would have been safer but smaller. I asked Lyra, carefully, if the human staff could have a second meal set aside before the palace grew busiest at night. Some were fainting during late duties, and fainting was dangerous even in a palace that prided itself on restraint. I expected dismissal. I expected that tight, polite smile powerful people use when they mean no. Instead, Lyra considered, then said, "Write me a list of names and times. If you present it clearly, it will be harder to refuse." "Who would refuse?" I asked. Her gaze flicked, just briefly, toward the corridors that led deeper into the palace. "Those who dislike being reminded that humans are not ornaments," she said. So I wrote the list. My hand shook at first, then steadied as the ink dried. I included the laundresses and the gardeners, the archive copyists and the candle makers. I included myself, because I was learning that humility wasn't the same as erasing your own needs. The schedule changed. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But enough that Myra stopped looking hollow-eyed in the halls. Enough that Thomas's humming grew a little lighter. One morning, weeks later, I found myself back in the gallery of glass, wiping dust from the lower panes. My reflection moved with me, no longer quite a stranger. The palace was quiet in that in-between hour when night had not fully left and day had not fully arrived. A curtain whispered. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. I did not turn quickly. I did not drop my cloth. I simply finished the circle I was cleaning, then straightened. The Vampire King stood on the other side of the nearest mirror, not close enough that I could feel him, but close enough that I knew it was truly him and not rumor. He looked past me, as if he had come here for the same reason I had, to face something reflected. A woman stood with him, perhaps the same one from my first morning, her voice like a ribbon. She glanced toward my half-polished pane, and her lips curved. "Do you like what you see?" she asked him again, almost playfully, but there was something gentler beneath it now, as if the question meant more than vanity. The king's gaze rested, briefly, on the mirror. In its surface, I saw not a monster, not a lover from a dark tale, but a ruler holding himself very carefully, the way someone holds a full cup while walking over uneven ground. "I'm doing my best to keep my composure," he said. He did not look at me directly. Yet as they turned away, his voice, quiet, controlled, carried one extra phrase, as if he were placing it into the world on purpose. And I see it kept in others, too. Then he was gone behind the curtain, leaving only the faint scent of old paper and something like winter flowers. I stood alone with my reflection, cloth in hand. My heart was steady. I could still feel fear in me. Fear didn't vanish just because you'd earned a little confidence, but it no longer owned the whole room inside my chest. I thought of my village, of my father's fragile breath, of my mother's brave hands. I thought of Myra chewing sweet bread with her jaw unclenched. I thought of Soren setting hot water by my desk without making it a debt. In the mirror, I saw a human girl in a gray uniform, hair tied back, shoulders squared, not hard, not defiant, simply present. Quietly, so quietly it felt like a prayer I wasn't sure I believed in yet, I asked my own reflection the question that had started all of this. "Do you like what you see?" I didn't answer with certainty. I didn't pretend I was fearless or noble. I didn't invent a grand meaning for my life inside these mysterious walls. I only said the truest thing I knew, and as I said it, I felt it settle into me like warmth. I'm doing my best to keep my composure. And for the first time since I arrived at Veylin Court, that felt like enough.